Hello, welcome to Business Statistics. In this lecture, I will talk about comparison of population proportions using Minitab 18. Here is our problem. Suppose the Acme Drug Company develops a new drug to prevent colds. The company states that the drug is more effective for women than for men. To test the claim, they choose a simple random sample of 100 women and 200 men from a population of 100,000 volunteers. At the end of the study, 38 of the women caught a cold and 102 of the men caught a cold. Based on the findings, can we conclude that the drug is more effective for women than for men? Use a 0.01 level of significance. To do hypothesis testing, the first step is to define our hypothesis. So our hypothesis, we will have null hypothesis, and then we will have alternative. So I will write alternative hypothesis first. Here the company states that the drug is more effective for women than for men. That means once the study is conducted, is finished, we will have less women having cold compared to men. So we will define the proportion of women having cold should be less than the proportion of men having cold. So this is how you will define, because it says more effective for women than for men. So that means the proportion of women having cold should be less than the proportion of men having cold if we use the drug. So this alternative hypothesis, I can also write it as a difference. So this can also be written as proportion of women having cold minus proportion of men having cold should be less than 0. So now I can write the null hypothesis, which would be the opposite of the alternative. So this would be the proportion of women having cold should be greater than or equal to the proportion of men having cold. So again, this I will try to write as a difference. So the difference would be the proportion of women having cold minus the proportion of men having cold should be greater than or equal to 0. So once we define our hypothesis, they gave us the data. So they took a sample of 100 women and 200 men. So out of 100 women, we have 38 women who got cold, and 102 men out of 200 men got cold. And they are asking us to use a significance level of 0.01. So I will go to Minitab. So this is a 2 sample proportion problem. So I will go to stats, basic stats, 2 proportions. So I will click on this. Now we have here both samples are in a column. Each sample is in its own column. So if we have a data in these columns, then we will use those 2 options. Here we have a summarized data. So the number of events, if you see, we have 38 women caught cold out of 100 women. So I will type 38 out of 100, and then sample 2. So sample 2 would be men. So we have 102 men out of 200 men who caught cold. So 102 men who got cold out of 200. Now we go to options, and we have a confidence level. If you see, our significance level is 0.01. That means our confidence level would be 99. Hypothesized difference, if you see, this is our hypothesized difference, which is 0, so we will leave it as 0. Alternative hypothesis, you will have 3 options: difference less than hypothesized difference, difference not equal to hypothesized difference, and difference greater than hypothesized difference. So difference less than and greater than are one tail, and difference not equal to hypothesized difference is a two tail. So if you see our alternative hypothesis, this is the difference: proportion of women minus proportion of men is less than the hypothesized difference. So we will select is difference less than hypothesized difference, and then test method we will use the pooled estimate of the proportion. So then I click OK and OK. So here is our results. So I will copy these results into the Word document. So I will copy this. So if you see, firstly we got descriptive statistics. So 0.38 is the sample 1's proportion, which is for women. The proportion of women is having cold is 0.38, and the proportion of men having cold is 0.51%, 0.51 or 51%. And then we have the estimate for the difference. Because our problem is a one tail problem, we will have only one, which is upper bound. So the lower bound would be negative, negative infinity. So then we have a test, hypothesis test. It did a null hypothesis test, which is P1 minus P2 is equal to 0, and P1 alternative would be P1 minus P2 less than 0. So p-value, this is our p-value, which is 0.017. We will use normal approximations p-value. So you might know that if p-value is less than alpha, then we reject our null hypothesis. Reject H null. So this is our statement. So if you see, our p-value is 0.017 less than, our alpha is significance level, which is 0.01. So is this statement true? Is 0.017 less than 0.01? This is not true. So this statement is false. So we say do not reject H null. So exactly the opposite of this. So that means we are not able to reject this. Women greater than men we don't have sufficient evidence, so our null hypothesis is true. That is what it is saying. So the drug company says it's more effective for women than for men. So this is we don't have evidence to prove this because our null hypothesis is true. So there is insufficient evidence to claim that the drug is more effective for women compared to men. So if our alternative, if we would have rejected our null hypothesis, then this statement would have been true, but we could not reject our null hypothesis. So this statement, we don't have sufficient evidence to claim this statement. So the other way is, if you see our proportion of women minus proportion of men is greater than or equal to 0 is our null hypothesis. And if you see the upper bound of our confidence interval, so this confidence interval actually goes from maybe I will write it here, from infinite, negative infinite, so I will write negative infinite to 0.009687. So that would be our confidence interval for one tail. So that means we have some values above 0. So if you see, this interval has 0 and above values, so that means this statement is true. So that's the other way we can say that our null hypothesis is true and we cannot reject it. So this concludes our lecture on comparison of population proportions using Minitab 18. Thank you.